Hi, and welcome back to my video lectures in Introduction to Sociology. All right, so we've just come off of learning about socialization. We've learned how we learn about rules, culture, norms, folkways, and mores. We've learned about some of the theories, Charles Cooley's The Looking Glass Self, which we will be applying throughout pretty much the rest of the semester. I'm going to bring that back up. So make sure you have a really good understanding of that. We also talked about Irving Goffman's role performance and impression management, how we want people to know that we understand, or we want people to know the role we're playing in. And then George Herbert Mead's Self and Society, Development of Self and Society theory of how we learn particularly those roles and identify and then can predict. And so the next stepping stone to this is what's called society and groups. Now, groups are huge in our society. It provides safety, protection, cohesion, that social cohesion. These are functions of groups. So those that would be studying, like Emil Durkheim, would be studying society and groups coming from functionalism. And of course, Karl Marx, Max Weber, any of the other sociologists will bring up a couple, looking at groups from inequalities. And once we get through groups and society groups and uh, deviance, we're going to really start applying a lot of these too. So all of this is a framework. So make sure that you're understanding this. So we are members of many different groups. So what is a group? Sociologists define groups as any collection of at least two people who interact with some frequency and who share a sense that their identity is somehow aligned with the group. So think about, are you a band member? Do you play in the band? Would you consider yourself a nerd, a jock? One of the clips I like to show is a couple of them, but one is from an old movie called 10 Things I Hate About You. And there's a clip in there where the new kid Cameron comes in and the other guy's showing him around and he's pointing out all the different groups or cliques in the high school. Another movie that I like to show about the rules of groups is from the 1980s, 1984. It just hit 25 years, I think. And longer than that, probably 40 years. But it was The Breakfast Club. And even though I went to high school, 40 years ago, even though I went to high school 40 years ago, and we had these cliques and these groups, they're still very similar in today's high school. Now, sometimes they might have different names, but groups are huge. And so, two students doing homework or group work, a club, gathering of friends, sports team, hobby, this class, especially if it was in person. But you're still all in this class. It's a group, even if it's online. And so that is a definition for sociology of group. Now, sometimes we use this word to cover everything. Sociologists do not. And so a crowd of people together at the same time, like a concert or neighborhood party or a festival, that wouldn't be a group. That would be an aggregate. It's a crowd. And then another term is called category. A category that is well known are Jeep owners. That's a whole nother cult kind of thing. But Jeep owners would be a category. Millennials would be a category. Dog owners would be a category. And so aggregate and category can become groups. So if you meet people that are dog people or, like I said, Jeep owners, that can become a group. Maybe there's an outing. I knew that they have, like during the summer, the Jeep campouts and everybody who owns a Jeep. And so people are there with a purpose, but then they're interacting with a goal. And then from that, you can have other groups. So Charles Cooley again, Remember, he's symbolic interaction. And Charles Cooley has defined a couple of these specific groups, and he says that groups can be divided into two groups, two ways of looking at them. So the first one he calls primary groups. Now, this has an expressive function. Expressive is uh, nurturing emotions. You'll hear those a couple of terms later when we get into um, types of leaderships, but also when we get into looking at gender in a couple of weeks. And so expressive function. Primary groups are your really close friends, your family, people that you're tight with, people that you would share things with, innermost secrets or something like that. You depend on for emotional support. This is your primary group. Charles Cooley says the other group is called a secondary group. Now, this is called, it has an instrumental function. You're there to reach a goal. Instrumental is more, we're reaching a goal, here's what it is. Not a lot of nurturing. This is not who you're going to rely on for emotional support. A or secondary group is a classroom, the band, the football team, the soccer team. This is a group that you're coming together for a purpose, and then you leave. Now, many people do meet in what's called secondary groups, and those members can become primary groups. In fact, think about middle school or high school. You know, a lot of sometimes the middle schoolers, it takes 2 or 3 middle schools and it funnels into one high school. And on the first day, you're put into a secondary group and you're hanging out in the classroom, let's say English, and you start talking to the person next to you. Well, you start talking quite a bit, and then that person does become a member of your primary group. You become really good friends. Primary groups usually end. They can also be work. And you can have your work bestie, but are you bringing home your work bestie? Is the difference. Are they now coming into other parts of your life before they become primary? And so, like I said, Cooley came up with primary groups and secondary groups. And the functions. How do they help you function into society? If you're in the secondary group, you're working together, you're learning together. Primary groups, that function is you're going to be leaning on each other in emotional support. Now, there's been a lot of studies with online networks. And prior to technology and internet and all that, in the last 20, 30 years, a lot of people, if they had their groups like out in person. And now there's a lot of studies looking at online networks, gaming. My best friend's son has a primary group of gamers that he has never met in person, but they've been in a group supporting each other. They talk to each other for the last, 15 years, but has never met them in person. He knows them by their game tag. And so, but they have become a primary group. And, it does provide for a lot of people that may not go out. That does provide that cohesion, that group. There are people that disagree with that in studies, but for the most part, most of them are looking at um, looking at online networks as a primary group. And so, remember we talked in socialization about that need to belong, to be validated. Well, this is a good part in why it leads into life in group. There was a sociologist by the name of William Sumner, and he created this concept of in groups and out groups. Now, like I said, groups are powerful, and inclusion and exclusion is a big deal in our society. Many of us want to be in that included in these groups, especially the ones that are powerful. You can see in groups and out groups take place on college campuses with fraternities and sororities. Go back to high school. Who has more of the in-group status? The jocks do. The band members may not. They're more on the out-group. A great movie for that one to explain is Mean Girls. You had that little in-group and they had rules. In-groups, this feeling that we belong in an elite or select group is validating the popular group. If it wasn't, would there be that much power there? Would they even exist? And out groups, this is the feeling of not being allowed in or being in competition with a group and can be motivating in a different way. We may feel that disdain or in competition of another group. One of the examples I like to give is I grew up in Miami. I love the Miami Dolphins. I don't know why. They haven't won a game, I think, in 100 years. But, you know, living in Miami and sports is a big thing. Kind of think about a sports team, and if you when you were in high school, who was your rival team? And so when I was in Miami, I became a Miami Dolphins fan, and I love Miami Dolphins. I was going to the games way back when they were in the Orange Bowl, and they actually had Flipper down at the end of the Orange Bowl. And so many years later, I'm still a fan. And our number one, like, nemesis, hate it, competition is the New England Patriots. Any self-respecting Miami Dolphins fan, we don't have friends who are New England Patriots. We don't let friends be New England Patriot fans. And so it's really funny because this has become like an in-group and a competition. And I know it's wrong, but if I'm walking down and I see somebody with a New England Patriots jacket, I'm not even going to do the folkways. I'm not saying hello. You obviously have bad taste. I'm not being nice to you. I know that's wrong, but that's the power of in-groups and out-groups. Now, New England Patriots kind of see us. If you're up north, that's the in-group, and Miami Dolphins are the out-group. It goes both ways, but in that setting. And so, this whole idea looks at, and in groups and out groups can be neutral or positive also, but it also explains some negative human behavior, defining how we're defining others as not like us and inferior. We're going to talk more about in-groups and out-groups when we get into social stratification, how we categorize people based on, and it comes back to this idea of in-groups and out-groups when we're talking about social class, race, ethnicity, construction of gender. So keep that in mind. And in-groups can participate in ethnocentrism, racism, sexism, ageism, and heterosexism. Because you're looking at, again, so many groups. There may be, depending on if you're watching, if you're one of my classes, but there's some great experiments that look at the power of groups. One is Robber's Cave. This was an experiment done back in the 70s with teenagers. It was more of a psychological experiment, but they did start off with in groups and out groups, and then they wanted to see, can you bring them back into cohesion? And so that's a great video if it's linked into your class. The Solomon Asch experiment, which I'll talk a little bit more in a minute, and the Stanley Milgram experiment. So another type of group is also called a reference group. Now, reference groups are not ones that we are part of. We're not interacting. It's not a primary and it's not a secondary group. But reference groups are a group that people compare themselves to. They could be peer groups, are common reference groups for all ages. Now, again, this might not be like you're sitting in a class. It could be people that you see walking down the hall, or it could be television. It could be influencers, TikTok. You're seeing groups, and you're looking to them. Okay, so what's the new fashion? What is the best thing to buy? This is where we got Stanley Cups. We were watching this and people were getting Stanley Cups and we're like, oh, that's the thing. Okay, that was a reference group, people who had Stanley Cups. You can also think about this when you're coming into as a freshman. If you think back, when you were a freshman coming into high school, and you're like, this is so new. It's different from middle school. How do we act? What do we do? And your reference group was probably the upperclassmen, the juniors and seniors, especially the seniors, the cool ones, that group. And they knew the ropes. I remember in high school, again, point out Miami, a long time ago. I started my junior year in high school, and we started at 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. That's when high school started. And so 10th was kind of okay. Came into my junior year, and I saw a lot of people wearing corduroy Levi's. Now, you can't find those anywhere. That was a bit of a fad, but they were corduroy Levi's. And not only were they corduroy, if you don't know what that is, look it up. But not only were they corduroy, they were different from the blue jeans. They had coral color, turquoise, all these bright colors. And so I remember watching this, and this was a new thing. And I remember going home and going, all right, mom, I've got to have corduroy Levi's. That is like the thing to wear now. And so she drove me down to the Levi's store, and we got some corduroy Levi's. I got turquoise and teal and coral. And by the way, those are Miami Dolphins colors. And and that lasted about a year and a half into senior year. And I remember taking them to college, and nobody had those. And I was like, oh, those go in storage, Goodwill, wherever. That's done. But we look to reference groups. When we're looking at groups and how they form and looking at stability, the stability of group, the size of the group leads to different aspects. So when you're looking at smaller groups like dyads, that's a 2-people group, or triad, that's a 3-people group. They have very strong internal cohesiveness. If you think about your best friend for a dyad, or if there's 2 best friends and there's 3 of you, there's a very strong connection. The dyad triad could be family if there's 3 members in the family. Married couple would be a dyad. So there's very strong connection. However, it's not very stable. What if you and your best friend get into a fight? No longer talking to each other. That group is gone. You bring a third person in, it makes it a little more stable, and they can be a mediator. But one person leaves, you're down to now a smaller group. And so the larger the group, the more stable it is. I think about the 3 colleges I teach at: Surrey Community College, Davidson Davie Community College, and Central Piedmont Community College. So those are the 3 colleges I had been teaching at. And Surrey Community College has maybe total 5,000 students. Davidson Davie probably has 7,000 students. And Central Piedmont Community College has about 50,000 students. And so thinking back to the pandemic, and people were kind of dropping out and not going to college. Some were doing online. And there was a big concern about the number of students not enrolling. So Surrey would be the most concerned, because if they dropped further down, they would have too many instructors and professors. What could happen? Could they shut down? Davidson Davie Community College was a little bit more stable, whereas Central Piedmont had no worries. The larger the number, the more stable the group is. However, flip back, smaller groups have more of a intense connection, and And larger groups present out some of the issues of uh, group think. When you have more people there into the group, there can be group think. People may not, they'll start relying on everybody else and go with that decision. You could also have lacking of group productivity. If you've ever been in a group project, the teacher is assigned a group project. Does everybody really put forth all the same effort? No, you have those who are slacking. Oh, well, it's a group. They'll get it done. I don't have to worry about it. And so those are some of the issues and effects of group, that conformity. Like I said, there's been a lot of studies. And so complying with group norms and expectations happens, especially in larger groups, and these effects of groups. But they happen also in smaller groups. We're all aware of who conforms and who does not. If you look around, find an example. I want you to take this challenge. It's not for grade, but take this challenge. I want you to look or think about it now, or start to pay attention and look at people who will conform. They're not going based on what they know. They're conforming to the group, that group think. Yeah, how much do you enjoy being noticed? Do you consciously prefer to conform to group norms so as not to be singled out? Go back to sanctions. Go back to culture. What would happen that for if you're breaking folkways? And so why do we do it? We went through that in socialization. Now we're talking about it in groups. We want to conform because we don't want to be that one that is singled out. Yeah, we want to follow those rules, follow the folkways. You don't want to be fussed at. Now, that doesn't mean that we do that all the time. It doesn't mean that we're a bunch of sheep, but there are a lot of times that we do conform. And why is that? Again, impression management, looking glass self. We want to, we don't want a negative image. We want to belong. So Solomon Asch was way back in somewhere 40s, 50s, but he was very interested in group conformity. Do we really follow the group? What's the percentage? What's that look like? And so real quick, he included that he did the experiment, and it was a line experiment. And I'm not going to take up the time in here. You do have the video. If you don't, it is in your textbook for my classes with the textbook. Go back and read Solomon Asch and that experience, or that experiment that he did. And so Asch concluded that there are two main causes for conformity. Number one, people want to be liked by the group or believe the group is better informed than they are. Oh, well, they all must know better. I don't know if I'm right. When everybody else is answering, I don't know if I'm right. And that's what he did his experiment on. And he found his study results disturbing. To him, they revealed that intelligent, well-educated people with very little coaxing would go along with an untruth. And he really believed this was the result of real problems with our society's education system and values. How do we value? What do we value? How do we value groups? Stanley Milgram took a little bit more, took that further, and looked at conformity to authority. And the timing that he did his was during the war crimes. He was looking at the Holocaust in World War II. And so why did a whole country follow this guy and kill millions and millions of people? And so that kind of sparked that sociological imagination, the questions, and so we started studying conformity to authority. How many times are you in class and the teacher is asking a question and you know the answer, but a couple of people have raised their hand and they've given the wrong answer, and you're like, well, maybe I'm just going to be quiet. I don't know. Or nobody's talking. I get this all the time in my class. Nobody talks. Nobody wants to raise their hand because they're not sure if they're right. And so they're conforming with the rest of the class by not raising their hand and not talking. For conformity of authority, I like to tell this story. When I was in college, how many times have you done what your supervisor or your boss has told you, even though you know that may not be right? And it doesn't have to be just supervisors or bosses in work. It could be other people in authority. So, for example, when I was in college, I was a junior in college, and we were living in the dorm, and we had a couple freshmen move in. And I know why it happened, but I walked in, my shoe was untied, and one of my freshman suite mates goes, in a sarcastic way, "You better tie your shoes, you're going to trip." I don't know exactly why I did this, but I have been a sociologist all my life and a trickster. But I looked down and I went, "Oh no. Oh, what am I going to do?" And she's kind of looking at me weird. And she's like, "What is your problem?" And I said, "Okay, I have a secret. And the only person who knows this is my roommate. But I'm going to share it with you if you promise not to tell anybody." And she's like, "Okay." And I was like, "The truth is, I don't know how to tie my shoes." And my roommate, her nickname was Mouse. My mouse isn't here. What am I going to do? And she kind of looked at me and, she's kind of like, "Are you sure?" "I don't know about this." And I'm like, "Can you help me? Can you tie my shoe for me?" And she probably in her intelligent mind that she knew I knew how to tie my shoes, but then there was that question. And the reason when she was questioning is as I was looking at this, and then it became a sociological experiment, by the way. And, I'm a junior. I was a little sister in the fraternity. I was a member in the sorority. I was very popular on campus. And so for her, and I was a junior, so she kind of looked at me more authority, a higher. And so she tied my shoe, and I kind of moved on, and I was like, "Thank you so much. Remember, this is our own secret. It's very embarrassing. Don't tell anybody." And so I went about, but like I said, it became a sociological experiment to myself. And I was like, "All right, I want to see if she'll do it again." And so I was coming into the suite. I knew she was there. I untied my shoe, walked in, and I came to her and I said, "Hey, I have a problem again." And it was about a week or so later. And she tied my shoe again. And I kept this up through the whole school year. Now, I backed off, but I was doing it pretty regularly in the beginning. And my suite mates, my other roommates and suite mates found out, and they were telling her, "Are you kidding? She knows how to tie her shoes. Stop." She's like, "No, she really doesn't. I'm convinced that she doesn't." And it it worked for a long time. Now the big key though is now she probably knew it was wrong, but she did it anyways. This is a key point to this in authority. You know this is something wrong. It's not just right. Or if your boss is trying to get you to tell everybody that the fruit is fresh when it's 5 days old, but he's trying to get rid of it, and he's telling you to tell the customers the fruit is fresh, you know that this is wrong. But do you conform? Are you wanting to keep your job? And so Stanley Milgram did a lot of work on that. And so these are the different types of things that groups do, and being around other people. It's not necessarily all just an individual. We're looking at groups. With groups, we also have what's called formal organizations. So we may have the band, the jocks. These aren't necessarily formal. Many secondary groups are large, impersonal, goal-oriented groups, or what's called formal organizations. These are called bureaucracies. Now, you've probably heard the term. You just may not know exactly what a bureaucracy is. The DMV is a bureaucracy. The college is a bureaucracy. The post office is a bureaucracy. These are big, large, formal organizations that um, come together. You'll find a lot of them in our society. Max Weber characterized a bureaucracy as having a couple of different components. So the first one is a hierarchy of authority. So let's look at the post office. You have down at the bottom, you have the people who are delivering mail. Then you have the people who sort the mail. You have a postmaster at each of the locations. Over the postmaster, you have a general postmaster. Over that, and it goes all the way up to the very top of the post office, United States Post Office, and you have one top postmaster. You can see this in the college. You have the faculty, then you have the administration, and then you have a president. And so there's a hierarchy of authority that you have to answer to. Another thing that you will find in bureaucracies is what's called a clear division of labor, which is also called technical competency. I had a student ask me the other day, they said, do colleges not have substitutes? I was like, no, colleges are more bureaucracy. Here's why. Now you can go into a high school, elementary school, middle school. I don't know why I forgot that. And right now, I've mentioned it before, if you have a high school diploma, it doesn't matter if you're 18, 19, 20, you can go work at the high school as a substitute teacher. You can even be a long-term substitute teacher. But in college, which is a bureaucracy, you can't do that. There's a technical competency. For me to be able to teach sociology, I have to have a master's degree at least, and at least 18 credit hours of, that's 6 classes, of sociology to be able to teach sociology. Now, I'm very interested in teaching, I wouldn't mind teaching psychology, not that I remember a lot from it, but my colleague who is just down the hall from me, and we teach both at both different campuses of Davie and Davidson, if she wasn't in, why can't I go fill in for her? Because I don't have 18 credit hours of graduate work in psychology. There's that technical competency. You can't have somebody who has been working at sorting mail in the post office jump up to be the postmaster until they've gone through the training and through the hiring and stuff. They can't just fill in. The other thing about the bureaucracy is there's explicit rules that are outlined and written down. They're standardized. If you don't know what I mean, go to DMV and forget one of the paperworks. They have this written rule. You have to have this, this, and this. Oh, you don't have it? Come back when you do. There's no giving to this. There's these policies that everybody has to follow through. They're very standardized. They're very outlined and written down. And there's impersonality. It's very impersonal. When I was doing part-time at Davidson-Davie Community College and the opening came up for the full-time faculty, just because I was one of the only people that had been working for the last 3 years as a adjunct part-time instructor, did not guarantee me the job as a faculty. I had to go through 3 months of, they had to post it. I had to interview for it. I had to go through another interview for it. There was all these written rules. And I did finally get it, but that's not how our bureaucracy goes. It's not just because you've been working there. You have to go through all of these different steps. Now, there are positive. I've kind of brought out some of the negatives. A lot of people complain about bureaucracies. Oh, we've got to go through the red tape. They're difficult to navigate. They're unfriendly. But there are positives to bureaucracies. They're intended to improve efficiency, ensure equal opportunities, and to serve a large population. So if the post office was not a bureaucracy, if there wasn't all this hierarchy and written rules, you may never get your mail. So there are positives to it. Now, there was a guy by the name, he was a sociologist, he's still alive, but his name is George Ritzer. And he started looking at bureaucracies, and he came up with this whole concept and theory called McDonaldization. Now, yes, it was based on the whole idea of McDonald's drive-through and the efficiency, and how now much of our society is really going towards looking at this increasing presence of the fast food business model in many of our common social institutions, including government, education, and even our relationships, convenience stores, hotels, Food Lion. There's just so many basing on this whole idea. It used to be back in my day when I was younger, if you wanted, let's say, tires or oil change, you went to the mechanic. If you wanted pets and pet food, you went to the pet store. Your hair done, a salon, the bank, pharmacy was a single building. Now we've gotten to this whole idea of McDonaldization efficiency. I can go to Walmart and I can go to the bank, get my hair done, get my nails done while my tires are being rotated, the oil changed. I can grab all my pet food, buy some clothes, get some food, and stop by the pharmacy. And so this is what George Ritzer is saying, is that we've now become this idea. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. There's efficiency to it. Whether you go into Food Lion or Sheets or QT, when you go in these, if you start to notice, every one of them are set up pretty much exactly the same. You have this section and everything is lined up. Same with Walmart. Sometimes it's just opposite. The food's down here and the clothing's down here, or the household stuff. But it makes it's very efficient. It's predictable. You know what you're going in to get. You can tell who works there by the props. The uniforms, the light blue vest. And they use it for control. There's a lot of watching. Now you can see all the video cameras watching that. And so while McDonaldization has resulted in improved profits and an increased availability of different goods and services to more people worldwide, it has also reduced the variety of goods available at the marketplace. If you're looking at schools, especially colleges, healthcare, all of this has gone to mass production. How many of you actually really see your advisor or really start looking in of what classes I'm going to take? You go online, here are they, I guess I'll take this, this, and this, and it's done real quick. It's like ordering at the kiosk at McDonald's. And healthcare now is mass production. Get in, get out. Now we even have telecommunication, that efficiency. George Ritzer, just his book is at 25 years, and he was starting to look at, he wanted to see if it's changed. And he says we've gotten worse. Look, man, I can have everything delivered from Amazon. I never have to leave my house. I can order my groceries from Walmart, they'll deliver, or Sam's Club and anywhere else. I go right on to Amazon, and I can get everything dropped off, and sometimes that afternoon or the next morning. Max Weber says that there's a huge problem with this. He calls this the iron cage theory. And this was not the McDonaldization, but the bureaucracy started a long time ago. And so back in Max Weber's day, he was looking at this and he was saying, one of the problems is individuals' worth is now determined by others. Personal desires take a back seat to material objects and higher status. Walmart wasn't around back then, but he'd probably be rolling over his grave and saying, see, that's what I'm talking about. It's not about the products people are making is just get in, get out. There's no the people's worth working there. It's just very centered efficiency. Let's get it done. It's no longer about personal desires. What do you want to accomplish? It's just let's finish this product and get profits. There's a loss of vitality and meaning in people's lives. You just get up and go. I'm going to go and load some boxes at Amazon warehouse, and off it goes. And then it also focuses on efficiency, and productivity destroys personal connections. Where's the personal connections? If you're ordering from Amazon, are you getting that personal connection? But are you really getting that in a lot of the stores now? Karl Marx also looked at this because a lot of this came out during the Industrial Revolution. Karl Marx looked at this and he said that he came up with what's called the alienation theory. And so with his alienation theory, he said work allows us to be creative and to live to flourish. Work is important. That gives us meaning. We need work. That gives us kind of a purpose in a sense. And he says one of the things that has happened starting during the Industrial Revolution, and it's just like I said, if you look around now, it's just gotten worse. And so he says one of the issues was that we have alienation from product. What this is one, the workers were making products and stuff that they couldn't even afford to buy. It was being sent off for other people who could, because they were being paid next to nothing. And so they were alienated from the product. But they were also, before the Industrial Revolution and the mass production that we have that has continued, you had, like I said, somebody who, did that sole thing, like making watches, making shoes. It was handcrafted. It took the time. They had pride in that. Now, working in the factories, the only thing you do is you have this little, let's go with a pocket watch. You just put the hands in there and move it on down the line. You never get to see what it is. Alienation from others, competition. There's no connection. Now you're competing each other for wages. Who can get the higher wages? Who gets the commission? Not relying on each other. I remember my father when we lived in Haiti, and living in Haiti, the jobs were all paid, and it was a set fee because it was a dictatorship. And my father was really struggling with the culture there because he wanted to teach all of the men that were working with him all the different skills of how to build a hospital, how to build houses, how to have those skills. But there was competition because if you had everybody who knew this, then there wouldn't be enough jobs. Every housekeeper in Haiti made only $7 a month. A cook could make $9, a yard boy $5. And so if you learned a higher skill, like learning electricity, learning how to build, that would put you up. And so they were like, no, you don't share this with anybody. You only tell me. That drove my father nuts. When he went to Africa in their 70s and were missionaries and kind of doing similar thing, it was a whole different mentality. Everybody shared. He was much happier with that. Alienation from self. That no sense of pride or achievement to that product. So groups are important in our society. The benefits, the leadership, how we conform. We want to belong. You're not going to do well on your own. We were meant to be in community, but becoming aware of how the groups and life in groups affect us is pretty important, especially for sociologists. All right, well, that's the end, and I will see you in the next video. I hope you have a great week.